I'm your hillbilly whisperer.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly right.
You're not even from the right region. We need to get an Appalachian on, and I don't know if we have.
I live in Appalachia now.
Right. That's true.
As of 3 months ago.
They actually leave out the whole part where he becomes evangelistic Christian. His dad is like a pastor or something like that, and they reconnect in his teenage years, and he becomes super fundamentalist Christian, right? And at one point, he thinks he's gay because he likes to read a lot and he doesn't like girls. So
I'd say the second bit's maybe more relevant. I don't know, maybe.
So he asks his mama, "Am I gay?" And she goes, "Well, do you like to suck dick?" And he goes, "No." Well, then you're not gay.
But what about the book?
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le bunga, bunga. Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Gustavia, on fait le bunga, bunga. Stockholm ou Monaco, ou Montevideo, Oslo, Tokyo, on fait le bunga, bunga.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bunga Cast, the global politics podcast at the end of history. Whether you're joining us from your kitchen while you're doing the dishes, or you're out for a run, or maybe you're having an intimate moment with your sofa. So we're here to discuss the film Hillbilly Elegy, which is based on JD Vance's memoir of the same name. So we're very happy to have a JD Vance lookalike, if you're watching us on video, Philip Cunliffe in Canterbury, England, George Hoare in London, myself, Alex Hochuli in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and a warm welcome back to friend of the pod, Ryan Zickgraf, who is Jacobin's JD Vance. Is that right?
Or Jacobin's hillbilly whisperer.
Yeah, exactly. Many possibilities.
And compacts, they share duties.
And you're coming to us
when I want to put on my right wing hat, hillbilly hat, I go to compact.
And the left wing, is there a left wing hillbilly? Is that a thing?
Yeah, the podcasters. Left Reckoning. Those are
Left
right,
Reckoning. I was on Left Reckoning just recently talking about the UK election, actually. The guy's he's in Texas, isn't he? Yeah, I don't know if does he call himself a left wing hillbilly? I don't know.
Doesn't has that aesthetic.
Right, yeah.
He had cowboy hats on the shelves instead of books, I remember. So I guess that's something. So
this is where we discuss movies for people who aren't members of the reading club. For people who are illiterate, we also do movies. So this is a bit like that. If you just have hats on your shelf, not books, then this is for you.
For the record, for those of you who are kind of blind like Alex is, I'm much better looking than JD Vance, and I think probably also smarter, but definitely less successful because I've not been nominated for anything as grand as Vice President.
And surely more modest as well.
Well, yes, I think I would add that too. Definitely more modest and more humble than JD Vance too. So, as Alex mentioned, this is our discussion of movies that we occasionally do. And I remember Hillbilly Elegy, which is directed by Ron Howard, stars Amy Adams and Glenn Close, and we'll talk a bit about their characters and whatnot. And it's based on the book by the senatorial candidate from Ohio, JD Vance, and now nominated, as everybody I assume knows, as the nominee, the candidate for vice president, nominated by Donald Trump most recently. And this is the movie based on the book on Netflix, about a 2-hour movie. Now, I recall when it came out, I decided against watching it at the time. And I think even though I knew then JD Vance was already a name kind of familiar to me floating around in political discussions, I assumed it would be kind of a straightforward hatchet job. And it wasn't clear whether or not JD Vance would be going kind of, much further. At the time, there was a number of kind of people discussed in the same space, like the other Hawley, who's kind of trying to kind of carve out that space of being a pro-Labor Republican. and did some kind of across the floor work, collaboration with Bernie and the Senate and whatnot. So, Marco Rubio and so on. So it didn't seem to me that any specific attention needed to be paid to Vance compared to these others who were already established politicians in the party. But in light of the nomination, it seems to me it was worth revisiting it. And I have to say, I did actually enjoy the movie. So, you
That's a hot
guys,
take.
that's a
Yeah,
hot
that's
take. Yeah,
edgy
edgy.
comment to start off. Yeah.
Well, hopefully some more edgy comment will follow. But did you guys watch the movie before or not? And maybe we can talk about what we think of the film as a film if we put to one side JD's political status now for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually listened to the audiobook when it came out, and I didn't really remember much about it, or in preparing for this episode, I couldn't really recall how the film differs from the audiobook exactly. So it was a weird kind of experience watching this film based on a book that I'd listened to, but I'd never taken any information from audiobooks. I have to actually read it, and I haven't read the actual physical book. And I remember thinking that it was an interesting counterpart to Jennifer Silver's We're Still Here, or maybe at the time that we did that episode, thinking there are some similarities. But I didn't watch the film when it came out because I don't think Ron Howard is my favorite director. I think he's not necessarily, or from, before watching it, I thought it's going to be one of those kind of schmaltzy kind of Ron Howardy type films. It's got Glenn Close and Amy Adams in it. Maybe all of this put together. I don't really need to because I've listened to the audiobook. But in terms of my overall assessment of the film, yeah, I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to. Interestingly, I looked up on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's got a 25% critic rating, but an 82% audience rating. So people like it, but not those kind of liberal coastal elite movie reviewer types, maybe like us. Only 1 in 4 of them actually seems to certify it as fresh. The rest think that it's rotten. But yeah, I can explain why I think this, but maybe I'll let Alex come in and explain why he didn't watch it when it first came out.
Well, I was waiting for him to be nominated, Donald Trump's vice president pick, so then I could discuss it for this episode. So I wanted it to be as fresh in my mind as possible. So I'll be watching it tomorrow. I watched the movie. I watched it last night. In fact, we're recording this on Tuesday, the 23rd of July. So listeners are only hearing this in a little bit, but I listened to it I watched it last night. And I have to say, I kind of felt more like the movie was watching me. It didn't grip me at all. I had to kind of make the effort to.
That's because you're a coastal elite that's dead inside, Alex, and you don't understand the struggle of the white working class.
It gives me a level of objectivity which I otherwise wouldn't have. I don't
What
get
do you mean
swayed
the
by
movie,
emotions.
What do you mean the movie's watching you? Like in Soviet Russia, movie watches you? I mean, did you think that the people in the screen were actually looking at you and?
Well, it's a bit like, that thing's going on and it's kind of demanding maybe your attention and you're kind of not engaged, right? It's not like you're like, oh, I'm going to see what's happening here, because the drama I thought was not particularly gripping. I knew how it ended, and wasn't particularly interested in how the parts get joined up. And I think that's a failing in my view of Ron Howard's direction, rather than the acting or any other element or any kind of inherent elements to the story. Although maybe perhaps the story itself isn't inherently gripping. Maybe if you're reading the book as a memoir, it is, and people who've read the book or have listened to the book can maybe tell me whether you think you found the book at least gripping. The film, it seemed like there wasn't any kind of dramatic tension or kind of the plot didn't pull it along anywhere, and it's not like it's not the type of film which you want to just hang out with the the characters necessarily, because that's obviously not the point. So.
Yeah, I guess a lot of memoir films have a bit of a problem. Like, what's the climax? What's the climactic moment of this film? Spoiler alert here. It's like he's got a job interview and he's got to drive, and it's like, whoa, that's pretty dramatic, dude. You've got a 10-hour drive, and will you make it? Will you not?
Okay, but the background is what makes the drive for the job interview, and knowing about how much is riding on the job interview for him, particularly in light of the fact that we know now that he's been nominated for VP for the kind of one of the big political parties. What about you, Ryan? What did you think of it?
I did see it during the pandemic, but like a lot of things during the pandemic, like it all just sort of melted away into like one big movie. Like anything I watched for that 2020, I didn't remember at all. So I did actually watch it last night, and I liked it better last night than I did in 2020. But I think also I've been trying to revisit the book, and I'm also trying to compare, what he said in the book compared to what gets broadcast. So I think that kind of piqued my interest more. But that said, I agree as far as like you're trying to think like what is the thesis of this movie, and it's a bit like my struggle to be a PMC, in a certain way, how he sort of he pulled himself up by his bootstraps with the help of his, is it Mama? Yeah, Mama.
Yeah.
But, there's familial tension, but unlike the book, there wasn't as much of a thesis.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of, in some ways, that was the most kind of interesting loose thread, because the whole I suppose, so it's riding at number 6 last time I checked in Netflix's rankings of most popular or most downloaded, and obviously it's had a second kind of burst of life as a result of the nomination. It's got I think, again, when I checked, it was 6.4 on IMDb, the rating, and that seems to me about right in terms of the overall quality of the movie. I'm a big believer in the wisdom of crowds in general, but very, very, very strongly when it comes to ratings on those kinds of websites. And I think it's about right as a movie. I'm not a great fan of Ron Howard, like George, for similar reasons to what George said. And I think the flaw, in so much as the film had flaws, I think you're right, Alex, probably many of them came from the failure to kind of relate different parts of the movie together. And that's direct, the flaws perhaps of the director more than any of the actors. But there is that odd tension because it's kind of driven by the disintegrate, or the kind of the decline arc of decline of this working class family in the industrial heart of America as it transitions to kind of deaths of despair land and whatnot. But it's all that is, in the end, he succeeds. I mean, spoiler alert, he's nominated to be Trump's VP. And so, the idea is, I suppose, like the kind of thrust of the film is you can actually succeed, like you say, and even get nominated to be vice president if you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, despite this terrible background of white working class decay and industrial decline in the American heartland. And so there's that tension at the core of the film, I think.
I think, yeah, one of the things which, I mean, maybe it's impossible to do this, but if I remember correctly, the audio book, I'm not going to say the book, I'm going to say the audio book, what it does obviously a much better job of, because it's got more time to do, is to describe what really happened to the community and how, the larger economic factors, actually determine the lives of these, I was going to say characters, but these real people. But unfortunately, what happens in the film a bit too much is like you just have this shot Ron Howard has of like, oh, here are some factories and they're not working anymore. It's like, oh, okay, that's a shortcut to kind of displaying kind of post-industrial decline. And how you do that on like within the limitations of like a 2-hour runtime of a feature film, I think that's really hard to do. Probably it might even be impossible. So what the film ends up doing, I think, too much is taking the shortcut that it's Amy Adams's character, i.e. the mother, who's like too much of the bad guy in it, and so it kind of collapses all this down a bit more than I remember the audiobook doing. And that's maybe a necessary kind of, maybe that's always going to happen in trying to condense a whole person's life into 2 hours.
But I think that's right, George. Like it starts off with this thread and trying to advance, I guess, what Ryan called kind of more the thesis of the book, and then it kind of abandons it a little bit, and then just leans into Amy Adams' acting, Glenn Close's acting, which are both quite good. I just felt, particularly in Glenn Close's case, that I was watching Glenn Close act. Like I never once kind of believed that she was his character. And again, I don't think that was Glenn Close's acting, which was bad in any way. It's just somehow something about it made it all feel a bit like you're a representative for this real world character. And there's this constant kind of going back and forth, of course, with the real world character. And the movie suggests that because it's about the past and what JD Vance as a young teenager is going through, and the present. But also because we know that this person has written a book. At least if you're watching this in 2020, you know that this person has written a book. So there's a third kind of timeline to which you're comparing to. And now watching 2024, you're also comparing to JD Vance, the politician, the economic populist, supposedly politician, which is different from the JD Vance of 2016 when the book came out, and even probably from 2020 when the film came out. So that kind of complicates it. It like suggests so many different kind of comparisons and viewpoints from which you're looking at this film. And I'm sure we'll get into the JD Vance's own political pivot later on in this discussion, but it does make it I guess intriguing. It may be detracted from my own viewing experience because instead of throwing myself into the film, I was kind of just not particularly engaged dramatically by the film and just making these comparisons going, okay, so there's this. But then he's the kind of ambitious guy at Yale, but a bit of fish out of water. But at the same time, then he's also going to be this economic populist. Where is he drawing those resources from, et cetera, et cetera? So you're having this, I was having a lot more of a conversation with myself than I was kind of just enjoying the movie.
That sounds very complicated way to watch a film. I wonder what would happen if you'd seen it in the cinema with some good old American popcorn.
Yeah.
And, that would have been, because I guess we all watched this at home, right? That is a different,
I have to say, I didn't, I thought Glenn Close was actually brilliant. I mean, direction and all that aside, I thought she played the character brilliantly. And I didn't see her as I saw her as a genuine character. And I think she, in fact, held the movie together. Amy Adams was also great, I thought, both in, their roles were great, and I didn't see them as kind of crude representatives. And particularly, I suppose, what I was struck by was, and the reason I found her so convincing was the intensity of the responses. As part of the plot is his grandmother, Mama, played by Glenn Close, she takes him in when he's in his early to mid-teens and kind of insulates him from the chaos of his home life with his increasingly drug-addled mother and the loser friends that he hangs out with. And I just thought the one-liners that she gives him in response to his kind of whining and teenage whining and complaining are not only they sound true, because you can imagine somebody like that saying those kinds of things, and I'm sure they're taken from the book and are authentic, but also the fact that she delivers them so well and so convincingly. I just thought, she inhabited the role. So I didn't feel like I was watching some, I wasn't conscious of kind of Glenn Close, but was in fact fascinated by the transformation from the kind of, character actor I know very differently.
She got very close to the character, you could say.
I was going to say, thinking about it a little more, I think part of the movie's problem, and I think it's the scope of a movie, is that the book is seeing Appalachia or rural poor whites through the prism of his family. So it's like community and family struggles, and then the movie tends to narrow it down to a familial struggle for the most part. And that just doesn't come across the community and the hillbilly culture.
Right. That's interesting. So that's something that's quite present in the book, you think?
Yeah.
Well, so I'm wondering, why. So you watched it when it came out in 2020. George, you had read the audiobook.
I do tend to read,
which is for the real intellectuals. You read the audiobook. But you watched the film recently, right? And Phil did as well. Yeah. So I'm curious why you didn't watch it until now. Because I have my reasons, but curious as to yours.
Makes it sound like your reasons are strategic. No, I guess I just as I said at the top of the show, it was just that Ron Howard. I like him so much in Arrested Development, and then I just thought I was going to be because there was a book called The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock, which was turned in, which I really liked, a collection of kind of loosely connected short stories, which was made into a Netflix film. And I watched that and I was like, that wasn't very good. it was way worse than the book. It actually detracted from the book. So I think in general, if I'm kind of have quite liked a book, I'm not too keen to always watch the film, because it's like I already know what all these people look like in my head, and that doesn't look like Glenn Close. That doesn't look like, so probably just I was too busy, mate. Too busy doing podcasts to fit in a film.
One thing I was going to say, though, is did you guys stay for the end credits to see what the real life family looked like? Because they actually did look a lot like JD Vance's real family, especially.
It looked impressive. Yeah, I don't know if it's great casting or great makeup or whatever, but yeah.
Glenn Close in particular. I mean, I was struck. So the guy who plays JD, what's his name? It's Gabriel Basso. He's definitely, I think he's more good looking than the real JD.
Why are you putting down JD Vance and how he looks all the time?
Phil obviously has a has a vested interest in being the better looking JD Vance.
He's got those beautiful blue eyes. I mean, what's wrong with that?
I think he's had a bit of a glow up recently, actually, because a lot of people, when they're talking shit about him, will post like pictures from like 6 years ago. But I don't know if it's the Ozempic or what, but I think he's doing okay.
I agree. And that kind of like, I think you're right. I think something has happened in the background, which clearly the Marines didn't quite, they didn't quite have the effect signing up for the Marines. So I guess that's the decline of the American military. A topic for another day. But I was struck by that. The character, like the real people, look so close to the actual characters. But I suppose inevitably, given this is BungaCast, we must move on.
Sorry, just before we move on, because I wanted to know why you hadn't watched it. Because I mean, or maybe I'll just say why
But like I said at the start, I think it was the fact that it wasn't clear to me that of the, Marco Rubio, Josh Hawley and whatnot, it didn't seem to me that JD Vance was especially significant in that space of pro-Labor Republicanism that they were trying to establish. And so it didn't seem, I assumed it would be a hatchet job on Netflix. So,
right.
Whatever.
No, because my thing was I had only absorbed the ideas about the film and by extension the book through the discourse, which was like criticisms made that this is just for urban liberals to know what goes on in the Trumpian mind, and plays to all the kind of urban liberal stereotypes that they might have about rural rural poverty, and particularly with whites. And therefore I was like, oh, this is going to be really cringe. And I wasn't sure in what direction it was going to be cringe, whether it was going to be poverty porn, or whether it was going to be demonizing Appalachians, or whether it was going to be the kind of, these poor things who need help or need intervention, or pull themselves up by their bootstraps sort of narrative. So anyway, I wasn't entirely sure about which one it would be. And I wasn't until I watched the film last night. But I did want to kind of... it did make me think about whether it conformed to some of those criticisms that I had heard. And I found less so than I expected. I don't think it was, I mean, to the extent that I didn't think the film, impressed me very much in any particular direction, but I didn't think it was necessarily poverty porn. I didn't think it was necessarily pitying. I didn't think it was necessarily disdainful. It was fairly neutral, actually.
Yeah, and has some good life lessons, like, ask for the driest white whenever they offer you like a white wine. How you identify the B and the D. How you identify what side the bread goes on, and how the drink goes on.
D is for dough, right? So you've got the booze and
bread
the
roll.
dough.
No, the bread roll is on the. Let me get this right. The drink is on the
right.
The bread roll is on the left.
Yeah.
You see, I didn't get this growing up like Alex did. So actually, I found that very useful advice.
I found it kind of. I did find that scene a little bit kind of hackneyed, because it's the most hackneyed kind of class difference, fish out of water thing. Like, I'm not sure what to do with formal etiquette, and it felt almost old fashioned, because those aren't the kind of markers of class that are so present nowadays. So I thought it was a little bit like
Zoom
hackneyed.
protocol now.
Right. Oh, is that it? Is that like,
yeah.
You don't have the right Zoom protocol, like you're like a parvenu or something.
Which hand is for posting and which hand is for evening?
Which hand is for groping yourself and which hand is for typing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. These are the real etiquette markers of today's PMC.
Maybe. I mean, it was a bit hackneyed, but I mean, I thought it worked. It was good. I thought it was did well, and the awkwardness in that moment when people kind of are kind of trying to chat him up about his background. But also, it was a good sign because he says he was connected to some famous kind of Appalachian outlaws, and they say, "Oh yeah, I watched that. I watched that Netflix show."
I have had, I will say, not in that cliched way, but I have had those kind of not dinner party at Yale Law School, but I've had awkward conversations when I talk about my family with other people. So in general, and this is a whole other thing, is I could relate to some of the things that happens in the book and the movie.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was, again, I thought it was, genuinely affecting, I think, in terms of a family that's kind of imploding under those kinds of pressures. And I thought the relationships were well done. And I thought Amy Adams also was brilliant. I thought, I thought she was really good as well as Glenn Close. And without them, there wouldn't have been a movie, in fact, I don't think. But I thought they were tremendous performances, actually. Anyway, we need to move on to JD's nomination, I guess. We have to stop calling him JD because it's like saying Boris.
That's just you, man. You decided you're mates with him.
I know. I didn't decide I'm mates with him, but we have to stop calling him JD because, like I said, it's like calling Boris Johnson Boris. So let's not do that. So I suppose the question that follows is how far, if the character in the film corresponds with Vance's public persona today, or if it gives us any meaningful political insight into what he might offer as a politician or as a political persona. And I think, from my point of view, I guess from what I get, from what I see and what I gather, he's a bit less confident than the way he's portrayed in the film. He comes across, kind of when he's doing his kind of public talking, he doesn't quite seem as confident as the former Marine in Yale Law School comes across. And he's got, he doesn't have the jawline of Gabriel Basso. So he just doesn't, I don't know, it's not quite, it doesn't seem to me like the character in the film is quite JD Vance. He's definitely been kind of glowed up, as you say, Ryan.
And at his heart, he's like the first real presidential poster. I mean, Trump kind of glammed onto it later. He was a TV star, but JD feels like a real, born to post kind of guy, and not quite the TV sort.
You mean because of his things about cat ladies running the country and that kind of stuff? He's got the sharp kind of line for it, or?
Yeah, he's got Twitter brain, I think, a little bit. And it just doesn't, he's good at those kind of short little, but, standing on stage in front of America, he was so awkward, like a wet mop.
Yeah. I mean, and he's not particularly charismatic at all, and not in a way which isn't just awkward. I find him slightly unlikable, just when the way he comes across, I think. But maybe that's just me, and I haven't seen very much of him. In fairness, what I think is interesting is that he's a guy who got, and which I came to this belatedly. He's like a guy who's famous because he wrote a book, which is relatively rare for politicians. I mean, you could argue Obama fits into that category, although I think he had a much larger profile than JD Vance did when each wrote their respective books. So this is kind of the version of something which we thought no longer existed, which is the intellectual becoming a politician. I mean, certainly in the Anglophone world, this is very rare nowadays.
I like you mentioned Obama because I read about half of this book in the last week again, and it kind of strikes me that he is a little bit of like the white rule Obama, this guy with like a marginalized background, I guess, so to speak, who gets into a fancy law school, has this like uses his biography as a way to draw people into these politics. And I don't know, might be full of shit.
Right.
Yeah.
I just kept thinking a little bit that he has some Obama-like qualities, a little bit like people cast their ideas onto him. He's a little bit of an empty suit to me.
Mm.
Well, that's not necessarily a bad characteristic for an American politician to be reminiscent of Obama. I mean, so I don't think I'd seen him give any speeches or really do very much at all. But in preparation for this episode, I watched his speech at the RNC that he gave a few days ago, and I think he was definitely leaning into the, or maybe it's just because I'd just seen the film and obviously it was forefront of my mind. But it seemed like he was leaning into the hillbilly elegy kind of story. So he introduced his mother. He talked about his grandmother and how she, was a woman of God, but she would swear and she was going to hit his ne'er do well mate with her car if JD Vance kept on hanging out with him. But I thought it was a good speech, actually. He kept on coming back to the same points about jobs, about America as a nation, and this kind of the line, like, I've lived the American dream and I want others to live it now, I think is potentially quite powerful. He has that. I don't know if it's cynical or not. It didn't. I mean, maybe it was so cynical and it kind of got past me, but it did. It did seem like there was some kind of consistency in the themes, at least. Not, can't really tell if that's coming from the heart or not, but it was that, like, I want other people to have this this thing that I've had and make America great once again. That seemed genuine, but maybe I'm taken in
Yeah.
after watching one film and seeing one speech.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I mean, it's also like the redemption thing is so. I mean, I defer to you, Ryan, as our American podcaster, but I was thinking. I mean, so I was comparing. I was thinking about him with, say, I don't know, George W. Bush, right? So, and the thing with him was, I mean, kind of an American aristocrat by comparison, but he had the redemption arc. So he was like the failed son of the Bush dynasty, a degenerate junkie and alcoholic who found God, became an evangelical Christian, and so on. And I don't think he would have been a successful president unless he'd been a reformed, degenerate junkie and alcoholic.
Wait, was he a successful president? Or do you mean
Well,
he succeeded in becoming
succeeded in
president?
getting elected. I wouldn't say he was a successful
Right.
president. I take that back. So I want, so the kind of the redemption thing is that redemption arc in your personal story is so tremendously powerful, such a tremendously powerful pull in American politics.
You sort of saying this is why Hunter Biden is such an arsehole, because he's setting himself up for the biggest possible redemption.
Well, who knows, man? It's I don't know, it's kind of fascinating to me that it's almost like you can't succeed without having traversed failure. That is kind of the premise of it. You can't, if you can't simply be kind of an aristocrat, the way you could conceivably be an aristocrat in the British context, for instance, and in European context, like Boris Johnson has a popular touch, but he's more, he's very elite figure, or David Cameron for that matter. Whereas in America, you have to kind of traverse failure to be electorally kind of viable or successful, at least in the current moment. I mean, maybe since the Gingrich revolution in the 90s. I don't know, but yeah.
Well,
Anyway,
I think that's right, and I mean I think I've made this point before, but I don't even identify that exclusively with the U.S. Though you're right that it is a particularly American thing. Though I think it's increasingly prevalent elsewhere because these narratives are transmitted to us through Netflix, for example, or through Hollywood, etc. That we're familiar with them. It's also that we live in democratic societies in which old elitism doesn't hold. Doesn't sell, and therefore, even if you're a conservative and selling a conservative vision of meritocracy, of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, or just simply of letting the market run things, or whatever conservative vision you prefer. I mean, and I'm thinking really of the conservatism of the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, perhaps more so than the kind of national conservatism, which is increasingly prevalent of parties on the right. But that notwithstanding, that within a democratic society, you have to sell yourself by, in some ways, starting with a negative, right? Like, you've overcome this negative. You didn't just start on a level playing field or start with advantages. You have to have overcome something. And those who don't have that can talk up a trauma, a personal trauma, right? And it becomes a psychological thing. Or you talk up a genuine lack of advantages that you have coming from poverty or from lack of education or from whatever it might be. But people weave their stories in different ways, but the important thing is that you do it, and everybody tries to do it. And this is, I think, why trauma is so narratives of trauma are so prevalent in society, particularly amongst the PMC. For people who maybe didn't have the sort of disadvantages which are sellable, then you can always talk up some personal trauma because, whatever, your cat ran away when you were 10 years old. And you can leverage that into a hard luck story.
And and I guess before the, you could sell, even if you were George Bush, like oil oligarch. I mean, the George Bush Sr., what you sold was the fact, you were in the Pacific Theater in the Second World War and almost got eaten by the Japanese or whatever. So you had the kind of the thing that made you an everyman, or kind of having a democratic experience as being a conscript in the military forces. Now, what do you think? What do you think, Ryan? You think this has legs as a kind of as a theory of American popular politics?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you watch the RNC, if you watched every time there's a new debate, almost every single time the candidate will get up there and start with a personal story and tell you about their parents, their grandparents, growing up with living in a shoebox. And I think that JD Vance does have that advantage where his struggle is a lot more authentic than, say, George Bush's. I think with W. Bush, a lot of it was like aesthetic. Like he was a more of a plain speaking guy who had ordinary tastes. I mean, a bit like Trump, right? That he was a beer swilling, he liked baseball and didn't use big words and often stumbled with his words. And so Americans do like that, or at least we've been told that we like it enough that we eat it up. But JD Vance's is more compelling than almost every story out there, and he's got a movie version of it.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. I mean, I think that is also, like you say, Alex, there are some things which are kind of striking about it. The fact that he wrote a book. He's famous for having actually written a book, which is something. Having a movie about his story already before becoming president. I don't know if there's any... there's been a presidential candidate or VP candidate in anything like that.
Reagan's been in a lot, was in a lot of films.
Was in a lot of movies. I'm not sure it's quite the same thing. They weren't movies about Ronald Reagan.
Well, it depends how you were reading them.
Trump, of course, was on TV as himself. It was the story of Trump already on TV. So this is maybe the
and he had lots of cameos. He had lots of cameos as well in the very postmodern, I guess, retrospectively thinking about it. He had cameos in Home Alone and in Sex and the City, and I don't know, one or two others, I'm sure. I suppose so. I've two kind of related thoughts, I guess, just before we move on. But I think Trump, for a character like Trump, who's so kind of pathologically kind of narcissistic and self-involved, he wouldn't have chosen Vance unless he had something on him. So I think, the fact that Vance is somewhat awkward, perhaps, and isn't quite charismatic, or struggles a bit to kind of cultivate this kind of public persona, I think that probably is partly why Trump chose him. So he is somehow, it's got to be his elevation is entirely, and the fact that he failed in the Senate race in Ohio, that his elevation is dependent on Trump's largesse, but also that Trump knows that he has a way to kind of best him. He's not somebody who will, I think Trump is confident at least that he will not be somebody who can outshine Trump, while he will also be able to continue the kind of the Trumpian America first politics once Trump is, stands down, assuming obviously that he wins the next election.
Sorry, just to answer your question though, Phil, whether this film gives us any meaningful political insight into Vance as a political leader, I don't think it does really. I think
he's got to be tough, right? I mean, if you've come from that, surely you've got to be tough. No?
Yeah, I would think so. But in terms of if his constituency were or is kind of white working class Ohioans, then there would be, there's natural things that he would do, tackling addiction, family breakdown, jobs. But I don't think this film and what I remember of the book, it's not like, or one other more recent memoir, Rob Henderson's Troubled, a memoir of foster care, family, and social class, which I did read the book of, so I actually remember something from it. That's a lot more directly kind of political, in the sense of, he talks about luxury beliefs, and he definitely goes at the kind of American universities, and is like, they're not based in knowledge. These beliefs are all just like what certain classes of people can hold, and actually they do it to enact social closure and to exclude people. And that's a very different, they're both talking about class, but that's a very kind of directly political conclusion. Whereas I think from JD Vance's perspective, it's a bit more individualistic. Like, he can go in a number of different ways. He has kind of got where he needs to get to in that interview. He's happy to be there as he walks through the door, but the film's very open. Like, that's just a starting point of whatever he's going to do once he gets into Yale Law School, and then goes on to whatever else is next. So I don't think it really gives that much of a kind of meaningful insight, other than, maybe you're right, Phil, that you got to be tough, or you've got to have a grandma who's going to kind of beat you into being a good student and see you over the line.
I think one thing that strikes me is actually reading the book is how apolitical it is, and he kind of makes a point of that. He at some point talks about how about deindustrialization and globalization, but he sort of waves that aside and says, my fellow hillbillies blame Bush or Obama, but really it's about culture. And there's all these individual and community failures, and we need to take a closer eye on that rather than blaming a politician. So in a lot of ways, he is doing the opposite of what he's doing now.
Yeah.
And he's trying to take politics out of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly, I think that's exactly right. And it's worth thinking of, like, why is that? How do you square that pivot? So he gives, it seems to me, like a kind of a neoliberal account. I've not read the book, but I've seen kind of some of the clips excerpted on Twitter that you mentioned, Ryan. And that kind of, the way he talks about it in very kind of neoliberal terms, it's kind of, we didn't learn to code, and that's why we failed. But it's okay because, I made it to Yale Law School, whatever. So it shows it's possible. To going to, now kind of saying we're going to put on tariffs and we're going to rebuild American industry. And that's obviously a significant political shift. And obviously it's a self-interested one on his part, because he's glommed onto a larger movement that can possibly carry him to office. But is he going to struggle to make it coherent, or is it going to kind of, are people going to hold it against him the way he talked about it originally?
So I was trying to tease out kind of three, or not three, but I ended up, I think, coming up with probably three different political directions. If you knew nothing and you only had the kind of cultural product as the book, and particularly which I haven't read, so the film, where would you see this pointing towards if this person were to become a politician, right? And one would be possibly the most obvious one, a more libertarian, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I was able to do it, and therefore through inspiring rhetoric and force of example, you too can do this. And what we need is just to get the state out of people's way, maybe something like that. What you could also have alternatively is the kind of, if that's a sort of 1980s politics, the 1990s version of it would be something more like, there's a culture of poverty. We need to help these people. A more sympathetic, less punitive, or less rugged version of that, where it's like, we need the state to come in with its agencies and provide people with help. But that, of course, is about helping with parenting. It's behavioralist, a kind of thing which you had with Clinton, but also with, kind of Blair and New Labour in the UK, very much more interventionist, focused on the family and early providing kids with a good early start, and then kind of letting them on their way. And then the third one would be a more workerist one, for lack of a better word, and to put it in the most kind of general terms, to help with reindustrialization, better wages, something like that. And that could be in a more the Republican or the Democrat version. It could be a democratic socialist politics, or it could be a kind of pro-worker Republican politics.
But that's only possible since 2000. That last one is only possible since 2016.
Indeed, absolutely, yeah. Hi there, friends. This is the end of a sample from an episode available only to subscribers at patreon.com/bungacast. If you're new to BungaCast, we put out a new episode every single Tuesday, with additional episodes most Thursdays. 2 of our episodes every month are entirely free, such as this one here. The rest is available in full only at patreon.com/bungacast. There you'll find episodes with our regular contributors, Alex Gurevich, Catherine Liu, Amber Lee Frost, and Lee Phillips. Think of them as regular columnists. There's also episodes with writers and editors from Damage Magazine, with whom we're partnered. And if you subscribe to our Patreon, you also get a free subscription to Damage Magazine, and I encourage you to do so. There's also plenty from the Bunga Boys, that is Phil, George, and myself. If you subscribe for $12 a month, you get access to everything we do. So that includes membership of the BungaCast Reading Club. Coming up this month, we present Julien Bonda's classic 1927 work, The Treason of the Intellectuals, a book that's probably a lot more cited than it is read. But we did read it, and we read it with you. In Bonda's time, it was the intellectuals' adoption of nationalist particularism that was the biggest crime as he saw it. But what about today? What should we expect from intellectuals in a time of conformity, and of the bureaucratization and commodification of thought, especially as we reach the end of a period of globalization, just as Bonda experienced in 1914. For everything minus the Reading Club, you can sign up for just $7 a month. Here's what you might have missed over the past month. We discussed academic populism and the culture wars with Catherine Liu, Ukraine's de-development and its war with Volodymyr Ishchenko, the French elections with Charles de Varenne, and us, that is Phil, George, and myself, on Britain's elections and Starmer's hollow victory. Coming up in August, we have Lee Jones and Shahar Hameri on the myth of China as a monolithic state, the colonization of civil society by the NGO, with Matt Thompson and Johnny Gordon Farley. And as many of us jet off on summer holidays, has tourism jumped the shark? How is this massive industry turning cities effectively into company towns? Is there any way to be critical of this process without succumbing to the sort of snobbery that usually accompanies critiques of tourism? If this all sounds good, come over and join us at patreon.com/bungacast. We'd love to see you there.